Hi everybody, welcome to my channel, Life, Law, Bin. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I have with me Joel Semakula, and he's a barrister at Landmark Chambers. Before I even go any further, I just want to say thank you for joining us today,
Pleasure.
Joel.
No
Now,
problem.
I always start with a fun fact about our guests, and one of his fun, cool facts is that when he's not in the court or doing anything legally related, he's performing on a comedy stage. Now, Joel, how did you even get into that?
Yeah, I think I've been a bit of a comedy nerd from a really young age. So in the days when we all used to listen to music on MP3 players, I would often have full comedy specials, listen, just blaring through my ears as I'd be going to school. And so I've always been really interested, particularly in stand-up. And then when I got to university, I was introduced to this whole world of improv comedy or improvised comedy. But I was too scared to do it when I was an undergrad. And when I went to actually to do my law senior status conversion type course, a friend who I connected with at a party told me he was really into improv and he was about to audition for one of the local improv groups, the big groups in Oxford. And I actually went down with him to support him in his audition. I didn't think it was really going to go very far. Anyway, I ended up kind of a lot of people showed up for these auditions, and I ended up doing quite well in them. And I found out I really enjoyed it. But ultimately, I didn't end up with that group. Then I was asked to audition for a different group. That was about 6 years ago now, and I got into that group, and I've been performing kind of particularly improvised comedy and do a little bit of stand up for about 6 years now. In fact, I just had a show on Friday.
Oh wow. That's great. That's really piqued my interest because I was actually very much into theater
Mm.
for at least 13 years of my life and I'm 22. So I always like the stage and I always like performing and stuff like that. So that's quite interesting. But
Yeah.
I mean, we actually have to probably have another episode specifically on you
Comedy.
performing comedy and providing us with some kind of laughter. Laughter is good for the soul. But
Yeah.
we're here today because we want to speak about your journey into the law, and I want you first to talk about your first degree because what's clear is that you didn't just enter the law straight away. You did a degree in economics and political science. So I want you to share just a little bit about that. Give us a brief overview.
Sure. So, I mean, I went to school in the East End of London, a school called St. Bon's in Forest Gate. Uh, and when I was, I think, 16 or 17, a teacher came up to me and said, Joel, have you ever thought about studying in the States? Now, at that point, I never thought about studying in the States. He told me about the program that was happening with an organization called the Fulbright Commission. And the idea was to encourage applications from students from non-traditional backgrounds, so the type of students who really make applications to the US, like a state school kid from East London, for example, and encouraging them to apply. Well, long story short, I got onto this US UK program and ended up getting a full scholarship at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Now, if you know much, and it was in an environment, a university that's what we call liberal arts. So rather than the UK, where you say, I'm going to necessarily study geography, I'm going to study law, I'm going to study medicine. In the US, you go out, or at least with a lot of universities, to a kind of blank slate. And ultimately, I uh, ended up choosing to study economics and political science because I really enjoyed that. But while I was out there, I studied German, French, history, astronomy, like all kinds of stuff. Did some literature. That was the beauty of the liberal arts side. But from about, it's a 4-year degree, and at about year 2 and a bit, they start saying, all right, it's time to settle down. So that's how I ended up studying politics and economics.
Oh, that's exciting, and I'm sure it's still kind of grounded some kind of knowledge there that you probably use, even if you don't use it legally. probably helps with your world perspective and your perspectives on what's going on globally or what's going on right here in the UK, as you probably follow politics or even the economic situation of things. So I think that that's always helpful when we study stuff basically outside of the law, because we don't live necessarily in a vacuum. All these different subjects relate to the law and interplay well. Now, I think what's exciting as well is that you also became an investment banker for some time at Morgan Stanley.
Yeah.
And you also did a stint at the Office of the Student Attorney General.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to hear now how we've moved from there now to this kind of work experience.
Sure. So, I mean, I should say one of the most exciting things about UNC while I was there was we had a completely student-run, what we called an honor system, but what others might call a disciplinary system or a disciplinary code that you might get in any university. And the idea was effectively every student signed up to this thing called the honor code. It was things like, basically you shall not lie, cheat, or steal. You shouldn't hurt other students or other members of the community, that kind of stuff. Excuse me. Now, if you did one of these things, what we called an honor code violation, you were brought up in front of a court, the honor court, that was made up of fellow students, no faculty, no administration, only fellow students. And one of your rights as a student was to be represented by somebody from what we call the Office of the Student Attorney General. So that was while I was a university student. And so from about my second year, I made an application and went through the process and became one of these student lawyers. Now I'd say, and so effectively for about 3 years, spent quite a lot of my university time acting on behalf of students and sometimes the university who had been charged with these violations of the honor code, and so appearing for them before this court of our peers. And that for me was one of the things that really solidified this idea that maybe I'd like to do this away from my university life, in my real life, perhaps back at the Bar of England and Wales. But that was really one of the greatest experiences I had as an undergraduate student. I absolutely loved being this quasi-student lawyer and arguing and making submissions and helping students in particular through this process. And then ultimately, I graduated in 2012, but in 2011, I got an internship with Morgan Stanley in New York, did the 10-week internship, got a full-time offer at the end of that period, and then moved to New York after graduation to start as an investment banker in the healthcare group there. So doing covering healthcare companies, doing things like doing M&A deals, helping companies buy and sell themselves and each other, helping companies raise money. And for me, that experience did partly rely on my politics and economics background, but also my comfort with numbers, and taught me a lot about the world of commerce, the world of business, the importance of relationships, and also, we really worked really hard while we were there. So that was ultimately how I moved into investment banking. But while I was in banking, that niggling feeling that I'd probably had really been driven up while working at the Office of the Student Attorney General, of maybe wanting to be back in something that was doing advocacy, be at the bar, become a lawyer. It never really left me. So ultimately, after my 2-year analyst program was complete at Morgan Stanley, I decided to leave the world of finance and kind of, I think, go pursue my first true love, I think, which was probably trying to become a barrister.
No, I think that one is truly inspirational, because I felt like I was on a journey just now with you. And yeah, seriously, I felt like I was on the journey, and I felt like, okay, we've reached this point now where, well, this is fulfilling, but I kind of miss what I was doing as a quasi student lawyer. So I think this brings us nicely to your legal education experience. So tell us a bit about your LLB experience and studying the law. How did that match up to your previous education?
Yeah, so ultimately I knew that, so if I wanted to come back to the UK to become a lawyer, I could either do a conversion course, which is what a lot, the GDL, which is what a lot, the GDL, which a lot of people do, or I could do this thing called the senior status course, which is effectively the full LLB, but in 2 years. And so there are a few universities that were offering that. And actually, interestingly, in my first year, I need to do the LLB, on a deferred basis at the University of Oxford, and I interviewed online. I got rejected, and so I didn't get in. This was while I was in New York, and also the next year I applied again, and I decided I wanted to do the LLB because I thought coming to the bar, perhaps I wanted a bit of a greater grounding in law, and perhaps wrongly, I was looking at some of the places that I was very interested in becoming a pupil, and I just thought many of their most recent pupils had come from some of these particular universities. I'm not sure if that's completely true, but that was the view I was getting. And so I thought, if I can get into one of these universities, so if I get into this Oxford LLB, maybe that will give me a greater chance of getting a pupillage. So ultimately, I then applied the second year, and that year I decided, I'm not going to do this interview online. I'm going to come out to Oxford. I'm going to take a few days off work and do this interview in person. And then just a couple of days before Christmas of that year, I got an offer to study the LLB senior status, so the accelerated LLB at Mansfield College, starting the following October. And ultimately, that brought me back out here, left my job, and took that on and spent two years at Oxford, probably two of the most challenging academic years of my life. Just think about trying to do the LLB a little bit faster. But ultimately, I think for me, getting a real good grounding in legal education that I was hoping, and I think has served me well, as a pupil and as a practicing barrister.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's something to I don't want us to overlook, but rejection, that is a common feature in most persons' lives, especially if you're trying to pursue the bar. And took me a while to understand it's not really a knock necessarily on you that you may not be good enough, but it's just part and parcel of the game, really and truly. You're not going to get into every possible thing, but I think it really does build up some resilience, determination, and perseverance. Because what's clear is that you got rejected, but you got right back up and you said, "No, I'm applying again, and I'm going to come down there and I'm going to interview." So I think that's wonderful. I think you were about to say something.
No, look, I think on that, I probably had like, sometimes I think I should write a CV of my rejections. They'd probably be greater than the CV of my achievements. I mean, I've probably been rejected at every stage of trying to become a barrister. I've been rejected for a scholarship to do the conversion course. I've been rejected for a place on the course, as I just said, to study. I was rejected probably over 35 times for pupillage. So at various stages. So I mean, the rejection's a key part of my story. I don't shy away from it. I'm very honest about it. But it's also a key part of many barristers' stories. And I think if this is what you want to do, if this is what you're interested in, you've got to be ready and you've got to be strong enough to deal with bouts of rejection, and more rejection than most people deal with in their lives. That's the thing about being a barrister, but about trying to become a barrister. Now, the reality is, once we get into the role, that determination, that resilience of being able to like have a bad day, have something not go well, and get back up, that is absolutely necessary for what happens when you go to court, what happens when you act for clients, what happens when things don't go necessarily well. One thing I always say to people applying, remember, when you're rejected, or when you get a rejection, they've rejected that application, they've rejected what you've submitted in comparison to everything else that they've received for that particular role or opportunity. They haven't rejected you. It's not you can't internalize rejection as something about you're not necessarily good enough. You've got to learn to sometimes separate yourselves a bit from that process. I think that's the only way you allow yourself to keep going.
That's good advice. Now I know you said that the LLB was probably a bit taxing or grueling because it was the accelerated one.
Mhm.
I always ask this, how did you find the bar course then, right after it?
I I'd say, I mean, I think the bar course is hard or easier for different people for very different reasons. People tend to have a lot of commitments, and so there are various reasons that make it, I think, quite challenging for certain groups. And now I'm saying I came off of one of the hardest academic experiences of my life. So for me, the bar course probably academically did not reach that level just because of how intense the LLB had been. Um, But I always say that you got to treat the bar course like a 9 to 5. If you treat it like a 9 to 5 during the week, I always thought it was quite manageable. It always got quite insane around the Christmas period and exam period. And I mean, the tough thing when I was doing it was, and I think they've kind of moved some of the deadlines around for pupillage, but there are periods you were doing those exams while trying to submit pupillage applications, while doing pupillage interviews. Now, it was all those things together that I thought were quite challenging, not necessarily the bar course by itself. I think if you build systems, bar course is a bit different from a lot of things because it's a lot of rote memorization. That's not really what you do on a lot of your courses or on a lot of your academic courses. And so that just requires pure time. Sit down, put your head down and try. So yeah, I think that describes a bit of how I approached it, or what I thought about it.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you, but I still think for me, I did the bar course with the LLM simultaneously
Yeah, yeah.
last year, and I found it was grueling, yet it didn't. Okay, my academic courses before obviously were challenging intellectually. I'm not saying the bar course isn't challenging intellectually, it still is. But just as you said, it's a lot more memorization and really just getting your head down. I think what's tricky about the bar course, especially in comparison to my LLB or even to my LLM, is the fact that you have to juggle so many time commitments. So some people
Mm.
are off trying to do a mini, and the thing about trying to do a mini while on the bar course is that we also have to maintain a certain attendance level because then you're going to be in trouble with the bar standards board. So it's trying to attend many pupillages, managing your qualifying sessions, putting in the required preparation for those
I
QSs,
agree.
you know? Yeah, yeah, you were about to say
No,
something.
so I think the challenge comes from all the things you need to do over the year, less, but not as much from necessarily the course
Yeah,
itself.
itself,
There's
yeah.
a lot that's required of you that year, and I accept that is
Yeah.
hard for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's definitely it because people also expect to maybe attain pupillage in that year. There's the pressure around pupillage, there's the pressure around the buzz that comes from your colleagues in the class talking about who they've applied to and which rung they've reached or managed to reach. And so I think it's all the competing little pockets of pressure that makes the bar course feel like such an insane year. So I always ask people
Yeah,
about that because we all have,
no, I think
yeah, we
definitely,
all
yeah,
have different experiences, but everything always seems like there's a consensus that it is still quite a grueling year.
yeah.
Now, yeah, you did have some legal work experience as well,
Mhm.
and you worked at Shell. You also did a stint at the Court of Appeal, and you worked with Fresh Fuels as well. So tell us a bit about your legal work experience as well.
Yeah, so Freshfields was a vacation scheme, which I'm sure all your law viewers will used to. I got that back scheme in my second year of the LLB or the final year, and I did that over the summer between the first and the second year, and ultimately got and worked there in the dispute resolution team. Unsurprisingly, enjoyed my time at Freshfields. Actually, I'm very indebted to Freshfields. Freshfields gave me a scholarship in my first year of the course, so they helped fund part of my journey. So I'm a big fan of Freshfields. And yeah, so I got the training contract offer, but ultimately decided the bar was where I wanted to go, and that decision was probably made easier when I got a full scholarship from Gray's Inn and a residential scholarship to study the bar course. It kind of just made it removed some of the financial risk for me. And I should say that I have had some other legal experience, and part of that was because I applied for pupillage the year before I did the bar course, and that year I applied, I got 7 reserves but no offer, right? And I applied for pupillage again while I was on the bar course, and that year I applied, I think I got 6 reserves, like something like that, and no offer. And so what the reason I'm saying that is because yes, I do have this legal experience, but part of that was driven slightly out of necessity in terms of trying to figure out what to do in those gap years while I was going to apply again. But again, I'm trying to bring back this theme that rejection is a part of my story, and I got very close many times and didn't quite get pupillage. And I know there are others who are listening who may have similar experiences, and hopefully that is a bit encouraging for them. But what happened in those 2 years for me was absolutely fantastic, because the first year out of the bar course, I got accepted onto the judicial assistant program at the Court of Appeal. I worked for I worked for a judge called Lady Justice Gloucester, and now Dame Elizabeth Gloucester. She's retired, and we had the most fun working together. I was working mainly on commercial cases, property cases, a little bit of human rights, not so much. But she was the vice president of the civil division at the time, and it was just so fascinating being one of her legal advisors. I mean, it made me a better lawyer. It made me much more confident in front of judges and working with judges, and it allowed me to see some of the best advocates in the country fighting some of the most important cases. Contrary to popular belief, most of the legal work, the hard legal work, is done in the Court of Appeal. And that's just purely because the Supreme Court doesn't take on anywhere near as many cases. Not as many cases get up there, unsurprisingly. So you just get to see so much in this powerhouse and engine of the law, really. And so there I was at the Court of Appeal, and I applied for pupillage during the Court of Appeal year. I think when I was at the Court of Appeal, maybe 50% of people had pupillage, 50% of us didn't. By the end of it, I think that number was much closer to over 85% of people had pupillage. And the point I'd make is it's one of the best opportunities, I think, for in terms of getting yourself pupillage, because every interview I went to, people were very, very interested in my experience with judges and in my experience at the Court of Appeal. It's just, it really gives you a level of insight. Ultimately, that was where I got my offer from Landmark Chambers, actually, during that year. But it did mean, obviously, I still had a year to fill. And that's how I ended up at Shell with their litigation team. And again, that was another fantastic year in terms of my professional career. I was working in-house in this global litigation team, helping the business figure out what to do with various legal issues it was dealing with, and giving very clear advice. Now, advising a business is very different from advising a Court of Appeal judge, and quite different from advising some of my clients I need to today. And just that ability and need to really learn how to advise in different ways. I was working in cases in Germany, in France, in London. I got to go to work on a case that made it to the High Court. I got a lot of experience in arbitration. I mean, all of this stuff was absolutely fantastic. So even though I haven't, was almost as a matter of necessity, there ended up being two opportunities for me in terms of my development. And actually, for example, some of them have actually worked out wonders in terms of the type of work I'm now able to do and what clients are able to offer in my life and practice. So, I mean, that's a story of my post-banking legal experience. And I'm very fortunate. I've loved every one of those jobs.
Yeah. And I think it seems as though each of them kind of added or enhanced your skills. So you benefited from each role. And I think that's the most important when something is so stimulating you intellectually. Now, Joel, I know that you assist students by publishing articles. You have one entitled "The Pupil Experience" in the Target Jobs Law Pupillage Handbook 2021. I also
Yeah,
read one of your articles a while ago. I think you posted that one on LinkedIn, and it was about what to do in effect during those gap years. So I
yeah,
just think it would be remiss of me to conclude this interview without us talking about the bar specifically and getting some top tips for our viewers who plan to apply for pupillage.
sure. Some of this is actually, because I get asked this question so much, I also produced a piece on LinkedIn called Pupillage Top 10. I think it's called From Paper Sift to First Round. And effectively, what I go through is what I think are my top 10 tips for actually acing that paper application to get yourself to actually in front of a panel. But ultimately, look, for those applying this year and about to make applications, I'd probably say three things. The first thing I'd say is quality over quantity. And what I mean by that is the Pupillage Gateway now allows you to submit, I think, up to 20 applications. And in certain practice areas, you can actually submit a number of applications outside of that. And it's true that every additional application may mean another chance at a first round. But if the cost of that is a reduction in the quality of your applications overall, then in my view, it's not worth it. I think there's no magic number for applications, but just make sure each one really is the best that it can be. The second big point I'd make is brevity. Now, I've just spent 2 weeks marking mini pupillage applications. Sometimes bullet points really are appropriate. we get so many applications, and most chambers have a rubric that they look at where they're looking for certain things, proof of having exhibited certain things on your applications. And if it can be done in bullet points, do it. I mean, brevity is your friend. It's part of your advocacy. It's what judges expect of you when you actually do appear in front of them. So look, it's definitely worth just bearing that in mind. And probably the worst example of it is how long I've spent speaking about brevity. And I think the third thing I'd say is actually apply. When I say this, I get so many requests from students or people who are wannabe barristers. They think about barristers, particularly people from traditional background. They're so nervous about the process, so nervous about interviews, so scared that they get into this, paralyzed by this fear. And they end up making 1 application, 2 applications, not really giving it their all. And I just say, look, I know we're all scared of rejection, but you need to actually apply, give yourself a chance every single time, right, and learn something. And the best way to get pupillage is actually to make those applications. But if you want to see what the other 7 tips are, you can see them on my LinkedIn.
Yep, and as I said, you have some really helpful posts on there, so I'm sure you get quite a bit of traffic coming your way. Now, I know you also had an article, as I stated before, um, telling people what they can do, really and truly, in that unintended year awaiting pupillage. Now, you mentioned that awesome job working in the Courts of Appeal.
Mm-hmm.
I also know about paralegal roles, but
Yeah.
persons are always looking for something that will enhance their CV while getting paid. So, if you have any other tips at this point, I give way, I allow you to speak.
Yeah, I did write a piece on this. I've given away 2 of them. So, right, we're looking for an in-house opportunity and probably an intern role in a big corporate company or a big organization. That's often a good way to do something that's going to make you more effective and will get you paid. Obviously, I've mentioned the Court of Appeal, but I'd also mention the High Court judicial assistantship, which comes highly recommended. I know some people that have done that. I know it looks very good on applications. Paralegal roles can be great. Just make sure ask what you're actually going to be doing. If it's going to be photocopying and creating bundles, I'm not saying that's not valuable work, but perhaps I know there's quite a breadth in terms of what various firms actually allow you to do. So ask those kinds of questions from people who've already been there or are there, and see what's going to happen. I know a colleague of mine had a great paralegal position at a family solicitors. She had a great year and was really doing stuff that was building her legal experience and her legal abilities. So think about that. I always say to people, it doesn't have to be really fancy though. I mean, sometimes you can find great opportunities in high street firms. Sometimes you can find other opportunities. For example, you can decide to do some legal writing. You can enter competitions. I mean, now some of these things do actually pay if you win, right? So there are some other things as well. But those are some of the big ones. I often say, I also know you could possibly be a caseworker for advocate, which for those that don't know, advocate is formerly the bar pro bono unit. And I think that's another opportunity I've recommended to some people. But yeah, so those are my top ones. That's what the kind of things I'd be looking at.
Yeah, and obviously we wouldn't allow you to divulge any more of your secrets. We'd want people to go check out those articles anyway. So if you want some more invaluable tips, definitely check out those articles. Now, COVID, the pandemic, has affected all of our lives. Pardon me?
Not the C word, not the C word.
It has affected us.
Yeah.
Some of us more negative than bad, and other people would have had positive experience. Nevertheless, you were a pupil, and you kind of experienced it pre and during the pandemic. So
Yeah.
I want you to describe for us that experience. How was it just before the pandemic, and then how did it feel when you had to make that shift, basically?
No, good question. I think I just recently wrote a tweet about this experience or something that, and just talking about being one of the first, what I call hybrid pupils. I know that's a term we now use all the time, but obviously my first 6 started out completely normal. All of us thought we were going to be max in a 2-week lockdown. I had a fantastic 30th birthday party with many people in a crowded club in February, before we declared the pandemic, and was going to court with supervisors, traveling around, and all of that. Then obviously the pandemic hits. The Prime Minister declares a lockdown. I'm no longer allowed in my supervisor's rooms. No more hearings, and we're going to be working from home. Completely different experience. And also all the camaraderie that comes with being in chambers and being able to meet other members of chambers, particularly as a pupil, where you're often working on your own for large parts of that period when you're doing work, because you're not really a member of the teams, and you're reliant very much on your supervisor for a lot of that interaction. Meant that initially, I think pandemic pupillage can be a bit lonely, and that's just something that a lot of people were feeling. The other part was all the regular opportunities that you get in your second six to do hearings had completely dried up. And so it was a lot more remote advocacy, and it was a lot more practice. So through things like the specialist bar associations or your chambers putting things together. And I think that the third real change there was my chambers had very strict rules on when you could start and when you could finish, and people would make sure you were out. I think sometimes it can be a little bit harder to maintain a work-life balance, and stopping at the right time when you're kind of in your own house. And I think everyone feels that, not only at the bar, but also in other industries. So, I mean, look, those were some of the big changes. And interestingly, look, when I got my tenancy over Zoom, my tenancy decision over Zoom while wearing half a suit. I can assure you that it was the top half I was wearing. So, and I probably was the first tenant at Landmark to get his decision in that way. And we all had to adjust to being to tenancy remotely. So most of my first hearings were all remote. And it was only really about 3 or 4 months ago that I finally became one of those barristers traveling up and down the English court, the courts of England, and the county courts really large of England and Wales, and actually doing that, because for the first part, I really was a remote barrister. So it's been an interesting experience, and not many of us could have predicted what that was going to be like. But we thank God, we made it through the other side. So
Yeah, definitely. Praise is there. And it prompted me to think, because now you have the experience of actually going to the county courts in
Mhm.
person. Um, I'm sure you probably would have experienced online hearings. Do you think
Mhm.
you had to make any adjustments for your advocacy in person versus online? And what adjustments, if any, do you think you had to make for both types of hearings?
Sure, I think there are some adjustments that really need to be made when you're online. I think the first thing I'd say is I actually think skeleton arguments are much more important. Like really good skeleton arguments are much more important when you're online versus. I mean, they're just also when you're in person, they're important, but I just think they make a bit of an even greater difference when you're online. The second big adjustment you make is, I mean, I'm pretty digital as a barrister, so um, most of my I don't really print very much, or try not to. Um, Unfortunately, often if I have to do printing, it's so that I can take something to court for the judge, because I'm not always confident that what my instructing solicitors have sent through will actually reach the judge who's hearing my matter. But that's been a big change for me. I never ever got into the printing everything or becoming one of those particular kinds of barristers. And then you've got to think about all this other stuff, like we have to think about today. Make sure you're well lit, make sure your internet is stable,
Mhm.
make sure you can be heard, and taking yourself off mute. I mean, these are all things that you wouldn't have had to worry about. And sometimes hearings do take a bit longer, because if you have a lay party whose internet or something goes off, that can sometimes cause issues. But I want to go on record, though, as saying that, look, I think remote hearings do serve a really valuable purpose in our justice system, and they should be retained to a certain extent. And I think parties should have real conversations. It should be part of the case management process as to whether or not hearings really need to be in person or otherwise. I'm not sure that view by everybody, but generally, I like a hybrid mix. I think sometimes it is better for us to be in person, but there are some hearings for which it does remain appropriate, particularly smaller procedural hearings, smaller hearings where we're only there for a very short amount of time, or perhaps where the other side's clearly not showing up. Anyway, it just makes sense for it to be remote.
Yeah, and it definitely sounds as though it would assist with the efficiency as well, that overriding objective that the court has, proportionate in terms of to costs and stuff like that. So I think it would definitely help with maintaining efficiency and stuff in the court system. Now, I feel like the last question around the our bar section of the interview would be for you to basically share any key tips necessary for students who wish to pursue the areas you practice, which include property, planning, environmental, public, and commercial. What should we be doing? What should those students be really focusing on doing to make themselves stand out?
Sure. So you've listed the 4 areas that I do, but let's just take a few of them. So if you're interested in coming to a set like ours, particularly planning and environmental law, planning inquiries often are online. I mean, that advocacy is online. I mean, it's often very easy to find out there's an inquiry near you. So you've got a greater access to getting the kind of legal experience that historically it's been quite difficult to get. So taking advantage of those kinds of opportunities and writing about them in your applications are the kind of things that will get you noticed. On the environmental side, that's a really clearly developing area of the law in this country. I reckon there's loads of scope for people to be writing interesting things on their LinkedIn or on their blogs, people to be entering competitions and hopefully winning them or entering moots. And that's the kind of stuff in that area that that one would expect to be helpful. Now, naturally, we often say we know that mini pupillages are very, very difficult to come by. What I'm trying to show is that there are a number of other ways you can really show a commitment to an area, you can really show an interest, and you can learn things that differentiate you from all that range of competition. Look, on the public side, really all of these sides, any kind of thing you can do to give you advocacy experience, whether that's through, I did a lot of things with the Communities Empowerment Network, so doing school exclusions, acting for parents whose children had been permanently excluded from school. I loved that kind of work. But it gave me real advocacy experience. So really seeking out mooting, seeking out the kind of things that give you that experience. And then the final piece, look, if you want to come to the bar, particularly if you're still studying, the biggest help you can give yourself is by doing as well as you can in your academics, because this ultimately still remains quite an intellectual career, and those things do matter. I'm not saying they're fatal if they don't go as well as you want, but often it becomes a little bit more difficult if you haven't done as well as some of the people who are applying against you. So I mean, those are my top tips. I hope that covers kind of things you're thinking about. And any others, you can definitely find them on my LinkedIn.
Yep, we're definitely plugging that LinkedIn right throughout this episode. And ultimately, we know you do some volunteering as well.
Mhm.
And this is why it's good to share that information. That's how I stalk my guests. So,
Yeah.
so what really prompted you to become involved in YDWC? What's it about?
Yeah, so I'm a director of a community interest company called the Young Diverse World Changers, and I've been involved with YDWC for some years now. We recently incorporated probably about two or 3 years ago as a CIC, and ultimately our main focus is trying to deal with the issue of initially the lack of diversity uh, in particular spaces, so the kind of spaces where a lot of our members work. So whether that's professional services, whether it's other kinds of industries, and trying to create a community for these particular for these individuals to thrive, particularly individuals from non-traditional backgrounds. And ultimately, we put on a number of events. We build partnerships with some very well known corporations and organizations in trying to really be leaders, thought leaders in the diversity agenda. So it's about creating opportunity not only on the way in, but also on the way up, creating community, realizing that your network is your net worth, and really creating social good. I mean, we're a community interest company. The whole point is we're meant to make improve the community. And so, why get involved in that? Well, I think this is important work. I think progression of people from groups like ones I belong to is important. I think it makes our society fairer, our society better, and I think it's the right thing to do. I think the people I work with on YDWC are fantastic people. all professionals really trying to do important and interesting things, and that I find that exciting, and is what I wanted to be a part of. And then I think also just being at a board level at an organisation like this helps me to learn a lot and develop myself.
That's brilliant. I think volunteering initiatives are always a good way to give back to society as well. So that's fantastic. Well, Joel, we've come to the end of this
Oh,
one today. Yeah, thank you very much for joining. I'm always excited when people say yes, and I'm always
my pleasure.
excited.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, have a good week, and we'll see everyone else on the next video. See you later, guys.